the, the, the challenges, the trials, the spiritual darts the devil is going to throw at us. So that takes us into fear. And look at a few of the basics of fear and hit the definition. I think it's Webster's. Definitely the online dictionary defines fear as an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous, likely to cause pain, or a threat. Does that sound about right? And there's different kinds of fear, but this is really the kind of fear that we're going to be talking about tonight. And this is the kind of fear that challenges us in our walk. This is the anxiety kind of fear. It's the stuff that keeps us up at night, the stuff that twists our stomach in knots. It sometimes makes it hard for us to be nice to people. It's the fear that keeps us from enjoying good things. It's the fear that keeps us from doing good things. And of course, this fear that we're talking about is way different than the fear of God. That is a good fear. That's the healthy awe and respect we have for God. We're not talking about that fear. We're talking about the scary kind of stuff fear. So in our daily lives, we face a lot of different fears. I've got a list. After I list these, y'all let me know what I forgot. Here's some things that in our society are things that could cause us fear. Violent crimes, epidemics, natural disasters, terrorism, mass shootings, deadly animals, disease, and these last ones to me get a little more real. Losing a job, our kids getting into trouble, loved ones hurting, dying, losing a relationship. So those are some of the things that cause us fear. Any other big things that we should add to that list? Yes. So as a occupation, I'm an engineer and I do work on 35, and it's the drivers on 35 that should cause us fear. Absolutely. But it could be the big scary stuff like someone that we love and are close to is very sick. It could be things that are kind of more minor, like driving on 35. These all things are the same, different scales, different types, different varieties, but the same version of this fear that we want to hit on, talk about. Yes, Steve? Absolutely. Feeling like you have to live up to somebody else's standards. You bet. Kenny? Yeah. I put fear of our kids getting into trouble when I was brainstorming, but I like that even better. Yeah. Kid, you bet. So Kenny said fear that our kids won't be Christians, fear that we won't be good role models to them, fear that people that we love won't follow or know Christ. Yes? Absolutely. Fear of failure. And Yeah, I was thinking that some of the things we listed previously could fit into that category, maybe losing a job, but yeah, just straight up fear of failure. Yes. Yes, what?
When we think of fear, we normally go to something that's negative, so I'm going to throw a paradox out.
Okay.
There are cases where fear is good. Now, paradox, statement is made that appears to be untrue. When I say some fear is good, and people say, no, it can be. But, like fear of failure, or fear of something that's dangerous, in a crisis, the human body prepares itself to meet that crisis. Boris Karloff, who was an actor, he made the statement before he went on stage before the cameras. He was so afraid or fearful that he trembled. And he was in the business of scaring people as an actor, Boris Karloff. So the body is prepared to meet a crisis. During a crisis, you have that fear. I believe you can be stronger at that moment. The heart is beating, blood is rushing through the body, the adrenaline is there, gives you that extra boost and that strength, and it can be turned into something that's good.
Absolutely. So Mr. Odom is proposing that fear can be good because it can prepare our body, I guess, chemically in a way, prepare us for this event we're about to face. And that's right. And what I like to suggest too is I think fear initially is just going to happen. It's not something that we should say is bad and we have to prevent. That initial fear is just part of life. There's no escaping it. It is just a matter of being humans, is that we're going to have fear. And that's a reality. It's what we do with it and how we handle it and how we let like you said, Mr. Odom, how we let our body respond to that fear. And if we choose to respond with God, or if we choose to respond with ourselves, will really help determine which direction it takes.
From a negative viewpoint, it interferes with their ability to do things. In other words, they're fearful because getting up in front of the audience makes them nervous. Well, that means that they need to face that and make the effort to meet that challenge. And whatever in life comes our way, we don't think of it as totally negative, but we think of it as positive. It's a boost.
It prepares us to meet that challenge. It's fantastic. Yes.
As he's talking about an actor and fear being, and talking about fear being a natural thing, whenever people are about to do something, especially in front of other people, and I can identify with it, you probably can too, you have butterflies.
Yeah.
But that's a fear, but that's a good fear that drives you, unless you let it overcome you.
Right.
But it can be a good fear in that it helps you to say, I can get past this anyway.
Absolutely. That butterfly, that emotional response, similar to what Mr. Odom was saying, is preparation helps us get past that fear. Yes, sir.
I was going to say in that same regard, the greatest ace of World War II was a man by the name of Richard Baum. He shot down over 40 Japanese airplanes. Every time he took off, when he closed the canopy, he was in such fear that he threw up. He had to carry a bag to throw up. But he overcame that, and he took off, and he became the greatest fighter pilot of World War II for all the victories he had. But I'll say this from being a pilot's perspective, in the military, we had people that down on his official record. So you have what's called manifestations of apprehension. And then you can go on and do other things and be a great officer, but you can't say that he was afraid of flying. So it's just the way it is in the military.
So I'm afraid we're going to have to reword the rest of our discussion tonight. We're not talking about fear. We're now talking about manifestations of apprehension. Okay. And I'm going to get a little personal. You explained that the fighter pilot, those butterflies, those nerves that were his body's response to flying before a battle would cause him to throw up. When I was in high school, I was the incredible 6'1", 175-pound center on my football team. And my senior year, before every football game, it was part of our tradition. We weren't ready to play football until Gerald got sick before the game. So my response was very similar to his. And then I'd be fine and ready to go. But yes, fear is just part of getting ready for a big something. So the world has, oh yes.
Well, since we're talking about fear as a problem with faith, we live in a society in very, very many ways is an evil society. It's all around us. And we all, to some degree, have a social standing in that society. And it can get very fearsome to know that you're going to lose that social standing if you live according to the way you're supposed to live. That's a fear that can directly interfere with your Christian faith.
Absolutely, that's huge. That in a society that has evil in it, that our fear of losing social standing by living as the Christians we should and standing up for what's right could cause us to lose standing. Yeah, and that causes fear. Absolutely. All right. So the world has a way of dealing with fear, and you know, by nature we'd go to look for peace, and use it to manage the fear. We can find in the worldly side of us, find peace in these things that are on the screen. Hopefully they're big enough to see. Job security, money, worldly resources, other people's opinions, self-reliance, knowledge and information. What is the problem with these things and using those to deal with fear and using these to find security? Yes. Yeah, that's relying on ourselves, and God is not a part of them. Absolutely. Yes.
I was thinking one of them is two different responses to it. There's kind of steal analogy from Paul. There's godly fear and worldly fear. And worldly fear is going to lead to paralyzation. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And godly response to fear is going to lead to power.
Yeah.
That's got me thinking, well, so I'm going to go this direction instead of that direction. It guides rather than paralyzes.
Godly fear leads to power. Worldly fear leads to paralysis. You bet. Any other thoughts on the danger with these? Yes.
They can fail you just as quickly as the thing that caused you fear in the first place.
Absolutely. They can fail you as quickly as the thing that causes your fear in the first place. Uh-oh. I lost the screen. I'm going to unplug and plug it back in. But these worldly solutions of finding peace and dealing with fear on our own, they're temporary. They are short-lived. They're going to fail you as quick as they come, and just as quick as the fear showed up All right, that is not the PowerPoint. All right. I think we're back. And so we know that, yes, what?
The world's solution to fear is turning in the Bible. A lot of things will give us a solution. Taking no thought of tomorrow, because tomorrow will be sufficient to take care of itself. And during the difficult times for Christ, he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. So the solution to fear is definitely in the Bible.
The solution to fear is certainly in the Bible. And we know that lasting peace, the lasting way of dealing with fear is when we turn to God, and He is the true comforter. He is where we find our peace. You look at some of the effects of fear and what it can do. And again, this isn't just that initial fear. This is the fear that I give into. This is the fear that I let consume me. I let it stay at the top of my mind, top of my heart. That fear has these effects. We know it can rob us of joy, keeps us from being effective as Christians. It separates us from God, and it stresses relationship. What else can we add to that list? That the nagging fear and the fear that we let consume us. What else can it do to us? Yes, impact our health. Absolutely. Was it? A coworker this week was talking about her allergic reactions and how much better they are, and she doesn't have nearly as many reactions as she used to because she has managed to manage her stress and manage her fear. Absolutely. Yes.
I was going to say, in the light of robbing us of joy, fear also robs us of love, because we know that scripture in 1 John 4 where it says that we love Him because He first loved us. But in the verse right before that, it says perfect love casts out fear. So, losing that relationship with Christ and loving Him and getting away from Him is one of the results of fear.
You bet. When fear's in our lives, we can't take advantage of the love of Christ. So we talked for a while about how we manage this fear. And again, we're talking about the dwelling kind of fear and how we work through it. The first thing we do is we take it to God. We know that, and it's pretty simple, but sometimes it's pretty hard to execute, and it's pretty hard in the moment to realize, ooh, I need to put this in God's hands. I need to get on my knees and pray. Look at a couple verses. Psalm 34:4 says, I sought the Lord. This is a psalm of David. I sought the Lord, and He heard me, and He delivered me from all my fears. Philippians 4:6-7. Go ahead and turn there, because we're going to be looking at this verse some more in just a little bit too. Philippians 4:6-7. This is the anxious verse that I think we all know pretty well. Be anxious for nothing, But in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And tell me, this next part, is this not what we want when we're in the middle of a situation where we have fear? And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Jesus Christ. So this is the choice that we get to make when we're confronted with a situation where we're afraid, where we have fear. We get to choose. Do I take this to God, like David did, and God delivered him from all his fears? Do we take it to God like what Paul tells us in Philippians, that if we make this request known to God and we go to him in prayer, that the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard our hearts and minds? So that's our choice. Choice one is taking it to God. Choice two is handling it on our own and putting that on our own shoulders and saying, I'm gonna get through this. So this is a question to y'all. Why do we do door number two sometimes? Why do we choose, when we have fear, to go it alone and not turn to God to deal with it? We don't have patience to wait. I'm going to deal with it right now. Yep. Pride, not wanting to ask for help. Absolutely. We spent a class a few weeks ago talking about pride. And yeah, I got this. Absolutely.
And you say, no one knows what I'm dealing with. I'm the one going through this. No one can relate to this.
Yeah. Nobody has been here. Nobody understands what I'm going through. I'm in this all alone. It's just me. Yeah. And Murray, we're going to talk about that more in a little bit, how easy it is for us to feel isolated in that fear. And I think that isolation keeps us from turning for help, both to our brothers and sisters and our people who love us and to God. Yes. More afraid of what God's answer might be. Absolutely. So, I might have a child who sometimes when he disobeys and will say, "Why did you do that?" And he'll say, "I don't know." And I'll say, "I think you do know." And he says, I don't know. And I'll say, "I think you do. Why did you do that?" And he'll say, "Because it's what I wanted to do." And I think sometimes with fear, if we approach it and turning to God, we know that maybe the way he wants us to handle it is different than the way I want to handle it. I want to do it my way, and so I'm going to push through and not turn to God to work through my fear because I want to do it my way. I like that way. Absolutely. All right, so first thing we do when we face fear is we take it to God. Second thing is we rely on his strength. Philippians 4:13 says, "I can do all things through him who strengthens me." And then another psalm, the psalm that our children know, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil because you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me." So this is relying, so we said the first thing is taking it to God and going to him in prayer. The second one is relying on him to get us through this fear. We fear no evil in the dark valley because we know that God is with us and is taking care of us and comforting us. What does this require for us to have this reliance on him? What does it take on our part? Trust, faith. Absolutely. This is a faith thing. This takes us having great confidence that he is able to do it, that he is there and he can take it on. It is faith. Hebrews 11, the faith chapter, it begins with that definition of faith. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. With this faith, we can see that God will strengthen us in our fears. With our faith, we'll see that he comforts us in these times. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. So 2 Timothy 1:7, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but a spirit of power. And she said, it's about who's in the equation. Is it God in the equation? If it is, then he can help us deal with that fear. And when we remove him from the equation, it gives the devil an opportunity to come in and use those fears. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. And so going back to Murray's comment from earlier, that we feel like we're the only ones. And we're doing this alone. Nobody's ever done this before. And this is a tool that the devil is using to pull us into that fear. Absolutely. Yes, sir. James 4:8, draw close to God and he will draw close to us. And when we don't do that, we rob ourselves of that experience of growing closer to God. And don't you know that when we're told to count it pure joy when you face trials, that is one of the ways that we find joy, is that we deepen our relationship with God. He draws closer to us in that fearful trial. Yes? What a faith builder. Going back and listing out those things that you've prayed for and seeing how God has worked through those. And I think we talked about that a few weeks ago, about seeing how he has worked in those things, and he will take care of me this time too. Absolutely. Yes, Floyd?
Gerald, those points you have up there, what to do with fear, all of them denote action. You don't give up. Go, rely, see, focus. Do not give up on those, because if you give up, you are going to fail. And Jacob had every reason to be fearful because he wrestled with an angel or a being. Not only did he wrestled all night. He didn't give up. He was persistent. And I bet he was tired. He wrestled all night.
I can't imagine. So this dealing with fear and the things that we're discussing, Mr. Odom says that they're all require action, that it's not just sitting in a hole and wallowing in it, it's doing something about it. And just like Jacob wrestled all night, we have to take action and work through God, with God, to deal with this fear. Seeing the larger reality. So, and this is going back to the one right before, that relying on God's strength and knowing that he's going to deliver some fear. One of the ways that he does that is helping us with our perspective, helping us with how we see things. And that perspective really affects our response to the fear. Go to 2 Kings 6, 13 through 17. This is a great story of Elisha when the king of Aram was at war with Israel. And he was irritated because every time that he would position his troops, Elisha would know about it, and Elisha would warn the king of Jerusalem, and they would react. And the king of Aram kind of got sick of it because he was thwarted every time, because Elisha always knew where his troops were. So, beginning of verse 13, this is the king of Aram's response to Elisha knowing his battle plans. He says, "Go out and find where he is," talking about Elisha, "so I can send men and capture him." The report came back, "He is in Dothan." Then he sent horses and chariots and a strong force there. They went by night and surrounded the city. So they wake up the next morning, and this is beginning of verse 15. They wake up the next morning, and the servant of the man of God, servant of Elisha, this is Elisha's servant, he got up and went out early the next morning. An army with horses and chariots has surrounded the city. And I grabbed the NIV version because I love how he responds in the NIV. He says, this is the servant of Elisha. He sees the city surrounded, and he says, "Oh no, my Lord, what shall we do?" Boy, that sounds like me sometimes. And so here's Elisha's servant, filled with fear. They're surrounded by the enemy. This is us with our fear, surrounded by the enemy. And Elisha says, this is in verse 16, don't be afraid, the prophet answered. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. And Elisha prayed, open the eyes, Lord, so that he may see. Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked up and saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. And the servant of Elisha was awakened to the power of God that was around them. And God didn't use those chariots and horses to defeat the enemy. Instead, Elisha ended up making the men blind, the enemy blind, and leading them to Samaria, and they were ended up not wanting to attack Elisha anymore. Anyways, the point is, it's a perspective thing, and in the middle of our fear, we sit and we stare at this overwhelming, scary thing like that servant did, and we get overwhelmed. We can, if we sit there and choose door number 2, we bury ourselves in fear. But when we step back and see the bigger reality, the spiritual reality, we see that we have the power and tools to overcome anything because we have God. And we see his power. We see his permanence, his love for us, and we see how we fit into eternity. That is the perspective that as Christians we're able to see in the middle of fear. We see how our troubles can be manageable, and how God can see us through them. In an eternal sense, how temporary and fleeting these things that are causing us fear are. That's what an eternal perspective can do. And I think that if we look back at some of those things in our lives that God has gotten us through, that we prayed about, we can see how we had probably 2 different looks at them. We had that initial look of, oh my goodness, this is awful and this is hard, and I'm never going to make it through. And then we were able, with God's strength, to see that God has this. I'm putting it in his hands. This is a manageable thing. In the scale of eternity, this is something that we can get through. I would love to hear the stories that we could tell about how God has done that in our lives. I can tell you that I think of some very profound ways that he has done it in my life. And that sense of comfort that I find in him, the comfort that I receive from my brothers and sisters, is incredible when we see that from God's perspective instead of the worldly perspective. We have 2 more minutes in class, and we have 2 more ways that we can deal with fear. The first is focusing on the positive. So earlier we read Philippians 4:6-7, and I said hold there, and then we did some other verses, and now we're coming back to that same area. So in verses 6-7, that was don't be anxious about anything, but take our fears to God. And then in the very next verse, in verse 8, he tells us what to do instead. He tells us to be positive. In verse 8, it says, finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. So we give our fears to God in step 1. Step 2 is then we think about the good things. If we have to fill our minds with something, let's fill it with the good. And then yeah. Absolutely. And verse 8 is an attitude adjustment. And then focus on the kingdom. In the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus explains, don't be anxious about anything. Let me flip back real quick. When he says, don't be anxious about anything, about your life. This is Matthew 5:25-31. We won't read all of it, but don't be anxious. Don't worry about what you're going to eat, what you're going to drink. At the end of that, and he ends that all the way down to verse 33, he says, but instead, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. So we handle that anxiousness by, instead of being anxious, focus on the kingdom. Focus on the godly things, and everything else will work its way out. So we're a minute over. Thank you all. I hope this was beneficial. I hope that you don't have any major awful things the rest of this week, but we have some tools to deal with them if we do. Thank you.